Hypothalamus artificial intelligence, HI. Digital transformation powered by real-time autonomous and intelligent algorithms. Presents its decision-making artificial intelligence solutions for Homeland Security. Case, Defending Oil and Gas Critical Infrastructure. Sun Tzu, in the book The Art of War said, "Every battle is won before it is fought." In the war on terror, planning supported by the scientific method can avoid conflicts, so that many battles are won without a fight. Human conflict planning. Security games theory. In 2002, the USA Department of Homeland Security deems 13 infrastructure sectors that must be protected: agriculture, banking and finance, chemical industry, defense industrial base, emergency services, energy, food, government, information and telecommunications, postal and shipping, public health, transportation, and water. For disasters caused by the humans it implies. The overall objective is to minimize the potential economic and human loss, and the social impact of the terrorist attack. To do this, models are proposed that study the opponent and hypothesize the decisions that can be made, using game theory models, on where, when and how to allocate defense resources. The state-of-the-art of scientific planning of confrontations, attackers versus defenders, is the use of competitive game concepts developed by John Nash. Security games study the convergence property to the equilibrium of a sequence two-player dynamic games, played by an attacker and a defender. The fundamental features of the game are: the evolution of the game is based on a stochastic fictitious play process. Players do not have access to each other's payoff matrix, and each must observe the other's actions up to present, and plays the action based on the best response to these observations. When the game is played over a communication network, there are another practical issues that need to be considered. Network latency. The players may make random decision errors from time to time. The players' observations of each other's previous actions may be incorrect, and the players will try to compensate for these errors based on the information they have. Homeland Security. Adversarial Risk Analysis. Adversarial Risk Analysis, ARA, is a relatively new area of research that informs decision-making when facing intelligent opponents and uncertain outcomes. It enables an analyst to express her Bayesian beliefs about an opponent's utilities, capabilities, probabilities, and the type of strategic calculation that the opponent is using. Within that framework, the analyst then solves the problem from the perspective of the opponent, while placing subjective probability distributions on all unknown quantities. This produces a distribution over the actions of the opponent that permits the analyst to maximize his expected utility. ARA is a decision-theoretic alternative to classical game theory, GT, that uses Bayesian subjective distributions to model the goals, resources, beliefs, and reasoning of the opponent. GT generally assumes that all participants in the game have the same beliefs about the other players, and that all players know those beliefs are known. This common knowledge assumption is frequently unrealistic. The ARA divides uncertainty into three components. Random is the uncertainty in the outcome conditioned by the choices of the opponent. This is managed through statistical risk analysis. Epistemic, a competitor does not know the opponent's utility function, nor the evaluation of the probability of outcomes, conditioned on decisions, nor even his resources, but a Bayesian competitor must be comfortable making subjective probability evaluations on each of these quantities, and conceptual, it reflects the fact that the competitor doesn't know how his opponent makes his decision. Maybe that the opponent is a game theorist, and looks for an equilibrium solution, or that randomizes, or follows some other protocol. ARA can lead to mathematical formulations whose complexity is comparable to that found in GT. There is no easy way to reason about other people's strategic thinking in realistic situations. Nonetheless, the decision-theoretic approach sidesteps some of the common criticisms of game theory. Important ARA applications are in defense, counterterrorism, corporate competition, criminal gang movements, homeland security, and cybersecurity, risk analysis. Homeland Security. Attacker and defender game theory models. This section is based on the paper Defending Critical Infrastructure. Critical infrastructure protection. Development of tools to anticipate, identify, and measure the risks to which a nation or region's critical infrastructure is exposed. This is to reduce the risks and consequences of an attack. B-level and tri-level optimization models to make critical infrastructure more resilient against terrorist attacks are used. Each model features an intelligent attacker, terrorists, and a defender, us, information transparency, and sequential actions by attacker and defender. 3 real examples are presented. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the U.S. Border Patrol at Yuma, Arizona, and an electrical transmission system. Each exercise gathers open-source data on a real-world infrastructure system, develops an appropriate B-level or tri-level model, and uses these to identify vulnerabilities in the system, or to plan an optimal defense. Only the first case is discussed in this presentation. Attacker and defender models. Attacker and defender models. The core of an attacker-defender model is an optimization model of an infrastructure system whose objective represents the system's value or cost to the defender, our society, while it operates. For instance, the maximum throughput of a pipeline network could measure that system's value, while power generation costs, plus economic losses resulting from unmet demand, could measure the cost of operating an electric power grid. Attacker-defender model. It is assumed that the defender operates a system to minimize cost, which is represented by an objective function. The defender is a misnomer in these models, because the models do not directly represent defensive actions. Call it system operator would be more accurate, but awkward. The model posits that an attacker wishes to maximize the worst damage he can cause, by restricting the defender's operational activities. The attacker determines an attack plan, AP, in which he specifies which assets of the defender he will attack. Attacking an asset prevents the defender from carrying out activities that depend directly on that asset. To determine the set of activities included in the AP, the attacker solves the optimization problem, AD, that is a type of B-level program. A B-level program is a type of Stackelberg game. Here, the terms leader and follower in a Stackelberg game represent our attacker and defender, respectively. The defender operates a system to minimize cost, which is represented by a linear, or nonlinear, function. Where C operating costs function, Y system operating decisions or activities, and Y belonging to if, a set of operational constraints, which must be complied with. The defender solves the problem D. The attacker wishes to maximize damage to the defender's system, which is achieved by maximizing the defender's operating cost, restricting the defender's activities, represented by the Y vector. Let xk equals 1 be if the attacker attacks the defender's kth asset, and let x vector be the binary decisions of an attack plan. That is, if xk equals 1, asset k is disabled, then yj equals 0 for any j activity that requires that k asset. Let yx be the set of feasible activities of the defender, constrained by the plan of attack x. That is, the attack on an asset prevents the defender from carrying out activities that depend directly on that asset. The binary constraints on x, and the set of constraints on the attacker's resources, are represented by x belonging to xf. To determine the set of activities included in the attacker plan, the attacker solves the optimization problem AD, that is a type of B-level program. A B-level program is a type of Stackelberg game. Here, the terms leader and follower in a Stackelberg game represent our attacker and defender, respectively. In this type of problem, the leader's decisions affect the follower problem, and follower's decisions affect the leader problem. Each player, leader and follower has their own goals, represented by their objective function. The image presents the AD model as a B-level problem according to Heinrich Freiherr von Stackelberg's theory. The key assumptions that make a Stackelberg game appropriate here are: I. The actions of the attacker and the defender are sequential. 2. The attacker has a perfect model of how the defender will operate, or should operate, the system optimally, even after an attack, and 3. The attacker will manipulate that system to their best advantage. The last two assumptions are strong but prudent for the defender. The defender cannot suffer worse damage if the attacker possesses a less than perfect model of the defender's system or fails to implement a perfect plan of attack. A defensive plan that hardens or protects the defender's activities will be prudently conservative if a defender-attacker model, DA, is used to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan. Many generalizations of AD can be devised. Naturally, the defender may also lack a perfect knowledge of the attacker's capabilities. That is, the defender may be guessing at the attack resource constraints that represent part of X. In this case, the defender will have to solve the model into a range of attack resource levels, and use these results, along with some common sense, to determine system improvements. Here it applies to use stochastic, or robust, games. Defender-attacker-defender models. The solution of an attacker-defender model identifies the most critical set of assets for a system. The ability to identify such assets leads to some obvious heuristics, to approximate the solution to the optimal defense problem, to identify a near-optimal defense plan, given a limited defense budget. But how do we identify the truly optimal solutions? In theory, one merely embeds the B-level attacker-defender model in a tri-level defender-attacker-defender model, DAD, where W denotes a binary vector of defensive decisions. If WK equals 1, then asset K is protected and made invulnerable. W belonging to WF denotes the binary restrictions on W, together with budgetary and other possible constraints. The inner max-min problem, ADI, simply represents an attacker-defender model with a restricted set of attack strategies, XW. Thus, the defender wishes to identify an optimal defense plan so that when the attacker solves the problem ADI, the benefit the attacker perceives is that the worst damage the attacker can inflict is minimized. Attacker and defender models. The core of an attacker-defender model is an optimization model of an infrastructure system whose objective represents the system's value or cost to the defender, our society, while it operates. For instance, the maximum throughput of a pipeline network could measure that system's value, while power generation costs, plus economic losses resulting from unmet demand, could measure the cost of operating an electric power grid. The strategy described is part of the so-called domain reduction of an optimization problem, mainly combinatorial. It is a question of reducing the dominance of integer feasible solutions, imposing logical and/or mathematical constraints, which, by reducing the number of integer solutions, significantly increases the speed of solving the problem, without altering the optimality zone. Limiting the number of assets that can be attacked is a logical rule, which avoids including in the process all the solutions that are part of the combinatorics. Paradoxically, in a combinatorial problem, the greater the number of constraints, the shorter the solution time. Homeland Security. Case: defending critical infrastructure. Case: the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The vulnerabilities of a space-sprawling supply chain are growing and riskier. Human intuition is incapable of optimally dealing with all the attacks that such infrastructure may suffer in physical space, or in cyberspace. Decision-making artificial intelligence provides the right tools to maximize the success of those who must defend society. In the aftermath of the oil crises, the United States established the SPR. President Ford set the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR, into motion when he signed the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, EPCA, on December 22, 1975. The legislation declared it to be USA policy to establish a reserve of up to 1 billion barrels of petroleum. The image presents the development and fill history of SPR. The SPR's crude oil inventory is stored in 60 underground caverns spread across these sites: Bryan Mound, Big Hill, West Hackberry, and Bayou Choctaw. The table presents the characteristics of cave systems. Drawing down and filling the SPR is a complex process. The design drawdown rate at an SPR site is the rate at which oil can be displaced, by raw water pumped into the caverns. Various factors can affect a site's actual drawdown rate, including cavern wells, or other equipment that are temporarily out of service due to maintenance, repair, or replacement. The caverns have been specifically designed for long-term crude oil storage. The standard cavern designed by the USA Department of Energy, DOE, is cylindrical in shape, narrowing slightly from the top to the bottom. These caverns are approximately 200 feet in diameter and 2,500 feet in vertical height, with the cavern 630 pounds per inch. 2. Figure is a depiction West Hackberry and Big Hill caverns, that were developed through sonar data. Purchasers of SPR crude oil are responsible for making their own transportation arrangements via pipeline or marine vessel. The oil from the SPR is distributed via 3 major pipeline and refinery distribution systems, Seaway, Texoma, and Kaplan. Connections to marine loading facilities are in place for each system. The Seaway system connects to the Bryan Mound SPR site and includes refinery centers in Houston and Texas City, and it includes ship loading docks at Freeport 400 MBBL/D and Texas City 300 MBBL/D. The Texoma system connects to the Big Hill and West Hackberry SPR sites and includes refineries at Beaumont, Port Arthur, and Lake Charles, and it includes Sunoco Logistics Nederland, 1.19 MMBBL/D, and Phillips 66 Beaumont, 200 MBBL/D, marine loading facilities. The Kaplan system connects to the Bayou Choctaw SPR site and includes refineries in southeast Louisiana, and it connects to the Street James Terminal marine loading facilities, 400 MBBL/D. In the northeast, 2 storage locations complement the SPR system. Northeast Home Heating Oil Reserve, NEOR. 1 MMBBL of government-owned ULSD is stored in 3 commercial terminals under commercial storage service contracts. The terminals are in Groton, CT, Revere, MA, and Port Reading, NJ, and Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve, NGSR. 1 MMBBL of government-owned gasoline blend stock is stored in 4 commercial terminals under 4 commercial storage service contracts. The academic case assumes that the U.S. is in a state of emergency, so maximum SPR performance is required, and consequently the cost of operation is measured in terms of any reduction below the maximum. The analysis can be performed with a defender-attacker-defender model. For this case, the team, researchers and users, assumes that the USA is in a state of emergency, so maximum SPR performance is required, and consequently the cost of operation is measured in terms of any reduction below the maximum. The analysis can be performed with a DAD defender-attacker-defender model, however, analysts prefer to explore a set of discrete options to get a sense of the problem. Therefore, the prescriptive model consists of the attacker-defender AD model. The SPR analysts, and the terrorists, have accurate data on the capacities of the pipelines, and the pumping rates. The case seeks a defensive plan for the SPR that lies in Louisiana. Figure depicts that section as a network, showing the Bayou Choctaw and West Hackberry storage sites as source nodes, 4 refineries, 4 ports, and 14 export pipelines as sink nodes, several pumping stations and junctions as transshipment nodes, and several pipeline sections connecting the nodes as network arcs. Attacker-defender linear model. For many situations, a linear program will provide an adequate model of the defender's system, and its operations. The optimal operation is represented by the D0P problem, where A equals B corresponds to general system operations constraints, and phi less than or equal to U represents capacity limitations for assets. Assets may include power lines, pipelines, roads, ports, communications hubs, and so forth. An attack on K asset causes the loss of all its capacity UK. Thus, the full AD is a B-level linear problem. The AD0P solution may be obtained using Bender's partition theory, but it is not discussed here. The image shows the formulation of the oil and gas attacker and defender linear model, used in the academic case. For 3 defensive options, optimal attack plans were evaluated assuming that the attacker can destroy any network components. Below are the defense options and results. Baseline, no defense. Destroying only two components of the system, the sources, reduces the optimal performance of the system to zero, i.e., it leads to the most expensive possible system operation. Therefore, a sensible defensive plan must include the sources. Protect critical core components. Uncover a critical backbone of components that, if protected, ensures the connection of the two sources to many, usually redundant, parts of the distribution network. With the backbone defended, at least 7 undefended components must be destroyed, before the system's maximum output drops below half, and protect a 10-mile radius safety zone around each source. This protects 3/4 of the system's capacity for any conceivable number of attacks. The decision depends on an analysis of assumed cost versus protected capacity, which must be performed by the decision maker. Homeland Security. Lessons learned. Lessons learned. The RAND Group, led by Gerald Brown, concludes. The answers are not obvious. The most damaging coordinated attacks, and the most effective defenses, can be unintuitive. This public infrastructure is huge and complex. The analysis of such a large infrastructure deserves rigorous, optimizing, and decision support tools, to formalize the notion of a transparent, two-sided conflict. High-fidelity models are achievable. We can formulate, find data for, and quickly solve high-fidelity models of critical infrastructure systems. Simpler, aggregated models may appeal, but unless verified by high-fidelity models, their answers will always be suspect, and insights may be lost. Heuristics and rules of thumb are useful, but not for identifying vulnerability. A reasonable heuristic for identifying good sets of defensive actions leads to sensible defensive plans, only if the system is very simple, or if the attacker is naive. If we base defensive measures on heuristically identified near-optimal attacks, we run the risk of being attacked by an aggressor who is smarter than us and our heuristics. Reliability is not the answer. We need to protect groups of critical components in our infrastructure systems, rather than backing up less reliable components. Malicious and coordinated attacks can be more damaging than random acts of nature. The attacker has the advantage. This is the opposite of classical military theory, and occurs, in part, because of the asymmetrical nature of this conflict. The defender must protect a huge, dispersed set of targets, while the attacker only needs to concentrate on a small set of chosen targets, to maximize damage. The data is available to everyone. The attacker also has an advantage in terms of information. Government agencies have created websites that offer a lot of useful information, to both citizens and terrorists. There must be an appropriate balance between the public's right to know, and the publicity of our vulnerabilities. Some systems are naturally robust, while others are not. Our road networks should be remarkably robust, fuel piping and storage systems are very fragile, most other systems are somewhere in the middle. Protecting infrastructure from attacks can be costly. However, by understanding the nature of the most damaging attacks, we can improve the robustness of a system for a given budget. Critical infrastructure has been built to be cost-effective, without worrying about belligerent attacks. There is a lack of economic incentives to mitigate this situation. An adequate level of redundancy and/or reorganization could be economical. Some types of infrastructure, for example, supply chains, will benefit, at low cost, by adding some alternative shipping routes, or by wisely relocating acceleration capacity. Like Herbert Simon, hypothalamus artificial intelligence believes that the computer-based mathematical modeling is the greatest invention of all times. Thank you for your attention.